Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin of ProLego, and today I'm joined by Cam and Ben. We are creating a new generative AI step-by-step mini-series, and over the next couple of weeks, we're going to walk you through a new generative AI project from start to finish and kind of address all the major decisions and activities like picking the model, preparing data, optimizing, evaluation frameworks, design user experience, and just kind of talk through some of the major decisions as we come up. And so today we're going to cover the very first step, and one where I see so many companies stuck, and that is like picking your first generative AI project. Yesterday, I released a video where I outlined 5 criteria for selecting your first project and explain how we think through them. I'm not going to repeat that here and say we're going to focus mostly on analysis and how we use them. So let me start with a couple of our goals. So we've been making these YouTube videos about building generative AI products for about 6 months. And I realized we had sort of a scattershot of ideas and wanted to show a step-by-step process for how you actually build one of these solutions from start to finish to help people out. So we were thinking about this in December and had a whole bunch of ideas and considered a bunch. And once we picked one, we sort of stopped back and said, okay, actually, how do we come up with that? We had some criteria, and that was the basis for the 5 criteria that we created. I'm going to show them to you real quickly for those who haven't watched the video. If I can remember how to present. Here we go. So these are the 5 criteria: fast start, access to accessible data, available experts for quick feedback on your solution, something open-ended with many paths to success instead of something where there's only one solution, and a project that is aligned to your experience, and I should probably say interest as well. So that's the 5 criteria we used, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how we used them, things we considered, and the project that we ultimately picked. All right, so Ben and Cam, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, doing great.
All right, so let's see. So I guess when we picked the project, I'd say we, but like I was actually on vacation and just put a message in Slack and said, come up with a project, and you guys did all the analysis and picking. So there's the royal we here. So what kind of projects did you guys consider? How'd you think about it? Like, just give me some ideas and tell me a little bit how it worked for you.
I guess I can. You want to go for it, Ben?
Sure. So we had done some different work as a company with trying to match or search within different kinds of rules and regulations. So one of the first ideas that we had was kind of extending a project like that. I think one of the problems, though, is that we're not necessarily personally experts in a lot of those areas. And data is kind of hard to find.
Yep.
So that was something that we considered, but maybe it kind of failed that accessible data criteria.
So to summarize, these were ideas based on client projects over the past year, but it was very domain specific. We needed expertise, we needed specialized data. It didn't fit our use case here.
Yeah. And I think I brought a couple ideas kind of pertaining to that. There was some interesting research lately where people were talking about how LLMs were having difficulty finding or answering questions correctly using SEC filings. So I thought it might be interesting to go explore that. But again, it's like this is not something that like I'm personally sort of new to this domain, so I don't have a lot of expertise in being able to validate the results. I believe.
Okay, let me pause here for everybody's benefit. So in this instance, public companies, when they every quarter, every year, when they have certain events, they have to file reports with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And those are big data sets of financial services information, and we use those a lot if we're testing ideas on projects because we do a lot of financial services work, and it's a way to get a rough sense if you're on the right path. So we could have picked a project based on SEC filings because that data is available and we have some experience in there. But like you said, it's also like that the projects tend to be extremely arcane, and a bunch of AI guys who've been doing data science work and machine learning and financial services for a couple of years is not the same as having an expert who's been working on securities analysis for 25 years. There's a level of gap there that we don't have.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially if we want to get going quickly.
There you
We don't
go.
want to be spending a bunch of time trying to learn,
securities law.
Way out of, yeah.
Okay.
But I think if I remember right, Cam suggested the project that we ended up going with, and as we all kind of discussed it and brought new ideas to it, it seems like a really good one.
It was. I think it's a sort of a combination.
Yeah. Did you think about anything else? I mean, I noticed you guys mentioned in the notes here a couple of gaming rules, or just like other what else did you guys consider, just for the sake of the audience?
Yeah. So, you can go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, I think myself or Justin suggested the notes / second brain Q&A. Just because myself, I've been thinking about making that because I write down notes everywhere, and then I want to look back at them, and I can't remember where I wrote it down or when or whatnot.
Yeah.
So just being able to Q&A your personal notebook, I think, would be extremely useful. But then that comes to the data issue. I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to share their whole 6 months back of personal notes or whatever. But that one was, I think it was another close second. Ben suggested the Magic the Gathering because that has a lot of different rules. There's a lot of cases. There's a lot of different. I'll let Ben speak that actually.
What's Magic the Gathering? What is that?
Yeah, so Magic the Gathering is a trading card game. It goes back to the early 90s. It was one of the first, I believe it was the first trading card game. So it's a game where there's sort of like new cards being released, and you build a deck that you play against other people with. And the rules are very complex. The base rules are very complex, but then basically every card just describes what it does. So each new card can kind of violate or extend the rules of the game. So it's very complex. But one of the interesting things about Magic the Gathering is that the rules are available just in a giant text file that's very cleanly formatted. So it would be fairly easy to parse and build a searchable database of the rules. I think there'd be some interesting problems as far as asking questions about the rules to such a system, because it would be very hard to answer questions correctly by just looking at one rule in isolation. You would kind of have to find how different things would build on combinations of rules. And then I'm somewhat familiar with Magic the Gathering. I used to play a lot about 5 or 10 years ago, so I could certainly look at the output of a system and be able to tell whether it was barking up the wrong tree or not. But it is kind of a niche thing, so maybe not the most general interest.
Right, but I think it's worth pointing out that for the purpose, we were looking for a project that we could start and end and show the major steps. So we could have really picked any of these and kind of gotten some results, but you guys came up with one that I instantly loved from lots of different perspectives, not the least of which that it's the kind of thing that a client may ask us to build for them in the future, because the value proposition is so obvious. So what idea did you come up with, and why? And my dog is decided that it's now time to come chat with me. So if you see,
mine too.
My dog is right here. So if you see me reaching down, I'm trying to keep him from doing what Cam's dog is doing. So we're getting invaded.
I have no restraint.
Right. So, all right. So tell us about the project you guys wanted to work on.
So I think it's like a combination of all Ben, Justin, and myself. I know for a while I've been wanting to make something that would do something similar. So like when training a machine learning model, what I'll usually do is save out, a checkpoint directory and have all of my parameters that I've trained the model with in some sort of information file. And let's say you train 10, 20 models, all with different parameters, and it takes a few days for each. Maybe after a while, you start to forget which model was, trained with what, and you have to look back through all the parameters and whatnot. And so I thought it'd just be great to have some sort of large language model be able to go in and find, using a combination of the parameters and, the evaluation results, just to get a general sense of which models were doing well. and you can also change the code during the time of those models being trained. So like, what has been changing over the process, and how is it changing it? And then so we just kind of came up with the similar thing of being able to just talk to your code base,
Right.
which I think is a really useful idea, especially if you're going into a new code base, like if you're just joining a company, or just joining a project in the same company or something like that, to just be able to go in and quickly get an understanding of what's going on without having to read every single line of code.
So let me just quickly summarize what I think it's. It's the idea is and using LLMs to understand, interact with your code base, and kind of get insight instead of having to just read all the readmes or look through the Git history and everything else like all of us do when we join a new project. Okay, great. Ben, you look like you're about to add something to that there.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking of some different comments to make. I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of like chat with the PDF is sort of a common generative AI project. This is sort of chat with a code base.
Right. Yeah. So, I think the chat with the code base is kind of like our current like shorthand for making it clear. But in most of these LLM RAG applications, it quickly is not chat with your code base. It's like it's insight, search, alerts, analysis, automation. I mean, it's more in that bucket. But right now, what do we do? First, we chat with our code base.
Yeah.
Makes it look clear.
Yeah. And I think just something that I would say is, as a software engineer, I mean, modern IDEs are really good, but I think one thing that's sort of missing is just kind of like a fuzzy search capability.
Yep.
Where something that comes up for me a lot is like, I know I've written something.
Yeah.
I know I've written this before, but I don't remember what it's called, so I can't search for it by name. I know it's in here somewhere. Just can I just describe what it is in English and then have it find it?
So I guess the code base in question here is the Neo Sophia code, which is the GitHub repo where we keep all of the demonstration code that we've been using for the 6 months for these videos. And because I'm not in the code every day, when you guys talked about this idea, I was like, oh, okay, analyzing our code. And then I just sort of went back in and looked. I'm like, no, we got a lot in here. Like, it's easy because I'm not in it every day and I just look at the high level. I forget how much we have built and how much you guys have. And I can appreciate when you start getting into the data and the examples and the interfaces and scripts. Like this is a lot to keep track of. I mean, it is as complex as the first release, software applications you would typically find at a company. There's quite a bit here. Yeah, and we don't have the time or necessarily the motivation to go back and like refactor and modularize things. So sifting through it is really not worth our time. Anyway, I just want to point that out for anybody who's kind of curious of what as a services company, what is our code base, and this is it. All right, so tell me a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about like how you're thinking about it, what the use would be. Like, how would you use this?
Go for it, Ben.
Okay. Yeah. So I think our initial idea would be, it would just be sort of a simple text interface where you load this up, kind of having it pointed at a certain GitHub or Git repo. There'd be maybe sort of a pre-analysis step, but eventually we can kind of maybe have it work a little bit more dynamically. And then you would just ask natural language questions and it would respond with answers.
Okay.
Maybe eventually we have plugins that can actually modify the code or insert code or update or move things around. But for starters, just sort of a text kind of command line interface.
Yeah. So one of our first examples was exactly what Ben was just saying, is searching using natural language for a function that you've written. Let's say you can't remember where it is. So like, is there a function in this code base that does this, that extracts text from a PDF, and then it has a tool that can go through and search through the files and find the function if it exists that does that.
All right, so it's sort of like I guess code navigation, code search. What about like onboarding, troubleshooting? Like, tell me, like, what are the other ways you could see this working in the future? I guess maybe more, not as much as like the RAG, but just like using, AI and LLMs on top of your code to help you use the tool as a developer to maintain your code.
So things like circular imports or dependency issues, or finding packages that you have that maybe now have security issues that are still in like your requirements file. Yeah, things like that.
I think finding entry points would be a useful thing. That's something that's always kind of tricky to figure out about a new code base.
Yeah.
If that isn't documented in the README, what are the
script
entry
do I run?
points? Yeah, and what are the command line arguments? Think like if you have a system like an LLM that can potentially read and understand code, it could explain a lot of things about how something works.
That should be documented, but like in the real world, it's not always the case.
So like whenever I want to go run, like if I'm going to do a demo of one of the apps we built, I got to either go through Slack and find the command, or I have to go look at the merge requests, the pull requests, and look for some notes. And I put it into, I put it in the terminal, run it, and then half the time it doesn't run, and I end up following up with you guys anyway. But yeah, I can see why that. Yeah, just finding commands would be like, I feel that with the entry point. Excellent. All right, so let's just talking through kind of the five criteria. I think you covered a lot of this, but all right. First off, maybe we should just say the next is the name. So, what are we calling this amazing project?
Ground Crew.
All right. What a great name. Who came up with that? So we went like the hardest part of the. I think it was 37 Signals that said the hardest part of any software application is clearing caches and naming it. So I don't know about clearing caches anymore. It's more automated, but certainly naming it is always a problem. So we spent about 5 minutes on naming. But the idea is, hey, you have GitHub, you got Copilot to fly the plane, and you have ground. You've got ground crew to help you manage and orchestrate everything. So it was the best we could come up with in short notice, and it's certainly good enough for our purposes here. So project Ground Crew. Let's talk about some of our selection criteria. So obviously it was a fast start. You had the idea, you could get going with it right away. We didn't have to go buy a data set, curate data, any sort of complexities there. Let's see, accessible data, it's our code base, available experts. Obviously you're building it for you. You guys are the experts. Although I would imagine that if you continue to extend it, maybe looking for ways you could access new developers or other developers that don't know the code, and that, and we would have to, as new people join the team. Many paths to success. This one is, I think, pretty obvious because you guys had a general direction of where you wanted to go. I bring up this criteria because we've talked with a couple companies that are trying to look for the first LLM or AI project. And sometimes they will say, well, we've got this risk score in our current workflow. We want to use this AI to generate a better risk score and store the risk score right there. And that's great that they have specificity, but the problem is it's so constraining. It doesn't give the product team an opportunity to look for small wins, quick wins. It's like it's either going to do X or it's a failure. And that is a really tough way to start with new technology. So, but this one is open-ended. And even if it was just a simple, chat with your data, like we talked about, it'd be worthwhile. Aligned to your experience, why was this particular project from the LLM generative AI? Why did you feel like this was going to push your level of knowledge past what you've already worked on?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of challenges to it. That are maybe not so obvious, but then become obvious as you sort of get down into implementing it. For example, one of the tools that we're looking at implementing is a generate docstring tool. So, okay, like you're going into your code base and you just say generate the docstring for any functions that don't already have docstrings.
Sounds easy, right?
It sounds easy, yeah. And then, okay, if you have any medium-sized code base, you're not just going to slap in all of the code and have it do it into the prompt because it won't fit in the context. So you have to first search for search for functions. Maybe you want to do it for methods, which are inside of classes as well.
Mhm.
And so there's just a lot of nuances that I think will be good for us to work through. And just some of the generability that like questions the user could ask. There might be a lot of gotchas that I think will be fun to think about and solve.
Excellent. And I guess related to that is that we've already done all of the, I would say 90% of the knowable hard challenges that we're going to see in our client projects for at least the next year, maybe two. Like we know how to parse data, build RAGs, do classification, work with data. Like we've kind of did all that last year. And so we were sort of scratching our heads a little bit. I was like, okay, we could do research, but if what we're trying to design is applicable to client projects, where do we kind of push ourselves in a domain that's going to allow us to learn something useful that we can share with them? And this seemed like one where we never worked with code in the LLM. Even though there's a lot of, I mean, everyone's talking about this, we've never done it, and it just seemed like it was an area to see like what are some of the, like, how does this technology work with software?
That's the thing I was going to say, is that we've done a bunch of proof of concepts that involve, like, given natural language or whatever, having the LLM write code. And we've done RAG projects where we're working with LLMs and like English text, but we haven't done so much with code as input to the LLM. So I wasn't sure, and it's something that we're still learning. Like, I don't know how much, what is the LLM going to be able to do in terms of understanding the structure of the code by itself? Versus how much are we going to have to handle that, and how we prepare the data for it? It should be able to do a lot of that itself, but maybe we get better performance if we can give it a little help. Things like that. Just things we don't have experience with yet that will be interesting to work through.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. This was really helpful. I can't wait to hear, in future episodes and, next week to talk a little bit about how you're rapidly prototyping what you're already learning, which is pretty amazing, and how fast you guys are able to do this. It's just a combination of your decades of expertise and skills and how fast you can do stuff with this technology. It just blows me away every time I see it. See how fast you guys can. You guys can make the code orders of magnitude faster than I can make YouTube videos about it. So that's why I'm always behind you. So that's the world we're in today. Any final suggestions, comments, thoughts for like a team out there that's considering a bunch of different projects, not sure which one to pick? Any advice for them?
Pick the one that is interesting and the easiest to get started with, and just do what you can to see if it works, and clean up your code later.
Yeah.
Because if you have clean code or messy code, if it's not going to work either way, then there's no point in spending a bunch of time making, perfect code if it's not going to work.
You can definitely accomplish a lot in a couple hours with this technology. So
it's
just
amazing. Just
try it, and then
then build some structure afterwards.
Yep. I'm begging like thousands of companies in America, like it's great that you have an AI steering committee to talk about options, but really just pick one you're interested in and just try it for a couple of days, and you will make more progress than you will debating AI for the next 6 months. Thanks a lot, guys. Great job. I'm really excited to see where you take that, and we'll catch everybody in the next YouTube Live.